So it's 2 o'clock in Brussels, and that means that it's time for us to get started. Before I say anything else, a happy announcement that there is interpretation with us today. So for those of you who'd prefer to follow in Portuguese, Spanish, or French, there's a little icon that looks like a globe at the bottom of your screen. And if you press that one, you'll have the menu of options for languages. My name is Antonia Wolf. I'm the Director of Research, Policy and Advocacy here at Education International in Brussels. And it's my great pleasure to welcome you all to this international webinar on democracy in the classroom. This is also the launch of a new, much awaited publication called Experiencing Democracy in the Classroom. Looks like this. This is co-hosted by Education International, the Global Federation of Teacher Unions, and the IEA, which is the International Association for the Evaluation of Educational Achievement. Our webinar today takes place in an increasingly complex context with increasing attacks on democracy, democratic systems and institutions, democratic values. And as part of that, also increasing attacks on schools, education systems, as not just sites for teaching about democracy, but also sites for practicing democracy. And this is really what we are going to focus on today. We're going to look at that link between the principles and the practice, look at what happens in classrooms, how we can support what happens in classrooms. And we're going to kick off with a conversation with representatives of EI and the IEA. So with me here in Brussels, I have David Edwards, the General Secretary of Education International, and Dirk Hastet, who's the Executive Director of IEA. And I'd like to kick off actually with a very broad question around kind of any immediate reactions seeing the title of this webinar, Democracy in the Classroom. Do you want to start, Dirk?
Sure, happy to do so. I mean, what we are seeing is that democracy sometimes is at stake, and there's threats coming to democracy. In the modern world, there's more polarization. So I think it's increasingly important that our students learn to be good democratic citizens also in the future. And for that, how do they learn it? Learning civic and citizenship is different from just math education. In math, you're mostly focusing actually on the subject. For civic and citizenship, it's somewhat different. You learn important facts. So how is your government structured, whom to approach, what are the rights, and so on and so forth. But on the other hand, it's beyond the knowledge factor. It's also how you behave, what are your values, and where do we carry that out? Well, I mean, students are the first thing if they're leaving home is to enter the schools. And this is where they're experiencing how people interact with each other. And in that case, schools are somewhat like a microcosmos
Yeah.
of the world. And so if they're experiencing democratic values, being valued, I mean, that's something that they carry over. That's something that they're experiencing. And that's so important also if we want to educate citizens for the future, that they get these values on board also and how to behave. And therefore, I think democratic classrooms and having experiences for students in the classroom is hugely important. And who's driving that? These are the teachers. I mean, we can tell whatever we want, But at the end, it's the question, how do teachers and students interact? How does he interact with community? So the teachers are here in the center. They are the change agents. They can do what no one else can do, giving students an experience that then they can carry on for their life. And that makes it, in my opinion, so important.
Yeah. Great. David, what's your thoughts?
I first welcome Dirk. Really nice to have you here with us. Democracy is extremely important value for education unions and Education International. And I think it's, I was thinking about the John Dewey at the moment. He's sort of kind of reflecting back. We used to say, do we or don't we, in terms of education for democracy and democracy for education. And what I see going around the world and visiting with my members who are our members who are really challenged right now because they are, in terms of the curriculum, what they can teach, their freedom to teach, the professional autonomy, the space and time they have to teach, what they teach, the histories they teach, the ways in which they make space for different views to be have voice and have deliberation. And at a time where what I would say the wrong drivers for that, for democratic education, education for democracy, are sort of high stakes testing, sort of surveillance instead of trust, and sort of sanctions, but what we're seeing right now, I think in terms of where things are moving, and particularly I think AI has a piece to do with this. That which is easy to test, as we know, is easy to automate, and the skills, the values, the behaviors that are really going to help us solve the massive challenges and problems led by teachers, and teachers with rights and understanding their responsibilities, and unions that can support them to do this, absolutely fundamental right now at a time of misinformation, disinformation, and scapegoating, and a lot of hate and a lot of mistrust. So I think the classroom as the sort of nexus of where we have to focus our attentions to create those space for the knowledge, the behaviors and the skills is really, really critical. So I'm quite excited that we're doing this right now. I think it couldn't be a more important topic right now.
Great. So I'm turning to you, Dirk, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts around IEA's work and leading the way in many ways when it comes to large-scale assessments, having been very clean in asserting the need to have a focus on civic education alongside literacy, numeracy. What are the challenges in measuring civic education? Having heard what the two of you just said about how this really is all about what happens in the classroom.
Yeah, thank you. That's a very good question, actually. I mean, we have, of course, our assessment TIMSS that measures math and science, and PEARLS measuring literacy. We have ICRS measuring digital literacy, and I think to a certain extent it's also somewhat related, because as you said, David, with AI coming into play, that changes how people interact and what's trustworthy. I think the whole area of finding information also on the internet and what are trustworthy information sources, that's an important factor that we should not forget. So I think also with the increased usage of computer, the digital world, that's already something that also impacts also civic and citizenship. So I think that's also very important that students have good knowledge and abilities in that area. But coming back to ICCS and the civic and citizenship, in the other studies, actually, we are mostly measuring achievement and look at what's contributing to that. So is it's the student background or how teaching is done, what's the student's background, etc. And okay, most important, how can we influence good teaching and learning in these aspects? Civic and citizenship actually is as I said in the beginning, is more multidimensional. So we are not only measuring the student knowledge, which is important, that you know how things are working together, how you can interact, how you can engage yourself, um, but also the willingness to be engaged. So are you willing to interact? Are you willing to vote? Are you maybe willing even to join a party and be elected? These are things that are as important as the knowledge. So it's attitudes, beliefs. Do we believe in democracy? Do we believe in other people's rights? Um, yeah, do we believe somewhat also in this global citizenship notion, that everyone has a right to live and we should make sure that everyone has a good living, about free movement in Europe, things like that. So it's a lot also about values. So that makes it, of course, a little bit more complex because it's not just, and I don't say that it's easy to measure achievement in math, science, and reading. That's also tricky. And I can talk a lot about that. But it's also that you have these other dimensions which are very important in civic and citizenship.
Yeah.
And what I need to say, one aspect is, of course, that what we see also that the world is changing. If you teach mathematics or science, that doesn't change that much. But with respect to civic and citizenship, you see changes in the world that also impact how teaching is done, how learning is done, and what is focused on by teachers, students, the society. So it's a more changing thing, which makes it also more challenging, of course.
Yeah, and that's something we might come back to. I was wondering here in the before that the kind of equivalent question to you, David, would be around the multiple expectations and pressures that a teacher is juggling in the classroom, knowing that in most cases curricula will have a set of values that are supposedly permeating not just the teaching and learning, but everything that happens in school. Yet there is a laser focus on measurable learning outcomes in many contexts.
I would just, I was thinking about when I was listening to Dirk, I should have said, in terms of assessment and evaluation, when they're set up, they usually have two different purposes. There could be two different purposes we see as teachers, right? So there is one that is about improvement, giving us information that's actionable, useful to help us change our practice, to change the curriculum, to look at policy, look at systems, look at all those kinds of things. And then there's the ones that's more about control, which are less democratic, let's say, right? And so teachers understand if they're in a system where the evaluation setup is about improvement because they get the information like they are with this study so that they can better understand where are the beliefs, where do they need to put time and space and effort. So I just think that's important to say that in terms of assessment. When I'm talking about the wrong drivers, I'm talking about sort of high stakes, control-based tests. And I forgot your question.
No, I'm wondering how we as a profession deal with the implicit and sometimes very explicit conflict between the values on the one hand and the more measurable outcomes on the other.
Yeah, well, I mean, I was just, it was a couple of months ago. I was speaking with our American colleagues who, inclusion, right? Inclusion, we would think is, and democracy would be something that is a pretty much a core value that we're united through diversity of ideas, but what we include people. So it shouldn't be so controversial to say something like everyone is welcome here. Yet there was a teacher who dared to put that in her classroom and was told that she had to take it down or be fired because that was not the school policy in this state, because under the new administration in the US, they are not to have anything that is divisive. So to even suggest that someone wouldn't be welcome, or no racial, gender, anything, she refused. And that's where I think we come in too. I really think in terms of being on the front lines of democracy and protecting and defending our members who are saying inclusion is more than just a word. It's an action. It's what we have to do and demonstrate to my colleagues to be brave, and to say, no, this is an inclusive classroom. I am not taking that down. If you want to take action against me, you can, but I'm going to have my union in my corner, and we will see you in the process. And that's what happened. And I was really happy that, both the teachers union in the U.S. actually took the Trump administration to court over these issues around diversity and inclusion in the classroom, and have won. But it's not a given. And so a lot of the curricular challenges and battles over whose knowledge is going to be taught, which words are going to be used, all of that is very much contested terrain right now all over the world. And so I think it's quite important that we're very clear. These actually are human rights. These are our core values, multilateral cooperation, inclusion, respect, dignity, listening to other points of view, and being able to disagree without being disagreeable, all those kinds of things, those skills. We have to be really upfront and say, no, we are going to defend these things. Otherwise, and we've seen it in country after country where illiberal democracy has been advanced very quickly, is that you had young people and teachers that are afraid to speak up. During the 40s, we had a very good example of that here in this part of the world. So no, I think it's absolutely crucial, but I see a role. I would say it's sort of, we have a pedagogical role, right? We have a political role. We have a professional role, and we have a personal role. And those 4 Ps, if I may, are really the ways in which we as the profession needs to be able to not just defend democracy, but to live democracy in our classrooms and in our organizations, which we're not always great at either.
Yeah, and I mean, it takes us away from, you mentioned inclusion as a value. And is one question, how do you make sure that inclusion as a value underpins and permeates all of the teaching and learning? It's a whole different situation if we are actually debating inclusion as a value and whether that is something that should guide our education systems. I'm wondering, from the IEA point of view, looking at the wealth of evidence that you're also collecting, how do you see this growing controversy around issues related to democracy and democratic values?
What we have seen also in our civic and citizenship study, ICCS, over and over again, is that what's really related to students' civic and citizenship knowledge and attitudes is an open classroom climate. Nothing mattered more than that from the school perspective. Of course, there's also private aspects like your home background, which always matters in education.
Sure.
We know. Gender differences always exist one way or the other. But especially in this area, what really mattered was that the students can try them out, can argue, can discuss, being taken seriously. Even if I have a stupid idea or something like that, we can talk about it and say, yeah, that's one perspective, but let's discuss this without just punishing people or whatever, but really being open. And I think this is where the teachers play a major role. How can we facilitate these discussions? How can we be open? Also, sometimes well, in your example where a teacher had a different opinion or whatever in the US, and it's also, well, maybe also students say, we don't want to be open. That's an opinion. And we may like it or not, but I think it's something that we should be open to discuss. Okay, what's behind it and why? And experience this kind of openness. And I think this is what I'm missing today. We live in this polarized world where people are throwing out these things and discriminate, but are not willing really to interact and discuss with each other. And that's something that students, and with that, the next generation of citizens can learn in school. And therefore, I think teachers play such an important role here. And they can do things that no one else can do for the future of our civilizations.
What would you say, David? To what extent can teachers do this? Also knowing that EI has members in many contexts where democracy is under attack, in many contexts, also shaped by war and protracted crisis.
Yeah. Well, I think the first thing that we have as EI is to just move towards that and show up for those teachers in those particular contexts. I was just thinking about the Arab Spring and so many of our members who were arrested and some even tortured for participating in the Arab Spring democracy movement. I was thinking about the Iranian teachers who I just was at the ILC. I was in Geneva at the ILO with the Iranian teachers from Tehran and talking about their experience in terms of what space they have. And I was thinking about Argentina, where I was recently, where over 1 million people were on the streets at the 50th anniversary of the return of democracy after the coup, after the dictatorship. And they polled the people on the streets and they asked them, like, how did you know to come out? What was it that why are you out? And 70% of them said because they learned about it in schools.
Yeah.
The mothers, the abuelas, the grandmothers, that story, the history, why democracy is so important, why it's so fragile, why it must be fought for. And it was the teachers that did that. And so in the teachers union, our members also support that. And then, of course, I was just in Ukraine last week, where they're literally fighting for democracy, for their own survival, and at the same time working on trying to make what you were just talking about in terms of sort of like the post-Soviet education system of sort of, frontal delivery, scripted. I taught it, you take down the notes, we test you, everyone goes home, no one speaks, it's all very orderly, and moving to a more open, deliberative, discursive, kind of democratic conversation. It gets a little messy, a little less control. And the people that aren't used to it, it's because it's not in the teacher education, maybe it will be now. Maybe we can work on all those kinds of things and those recommendations. But I think we just have to keep showing up and recognizing that democratic education, the struggle for democracy is something that is really going to require action. It's something where we have to. And I was just like Greenland. I was just in Greenland last week, where the world's teachers came together to support the Greenland teachers around their right to teach in their mother tongue, so that their students can understand them and can debate about the kind of curriculum and the kind of future they want to have. There's a thread that goes through all of these, and it's really important that I think international solidarity and international democratic organizations, particularly in education, come together and show up for our colleagues in whatever context they find themselves.
Yeah. I think what you say is absolutely right, but I think it's not only giving or assisting and supporting teachers, but it's also giving them the tools. Because I mean, we all know sometimes it's much easier to just be in front, just teach your things and then say go home. I mean, that takes probably less time. It's less of an effort. So it's really an important thing that we also support all the teachers that they do that, and let's recognize it's not an easy task. It's an additional burden. We know that, but I think we all wouldn't argue for it if we wouldn't think that it's worth it.
So that's the perfect bridge to the question I was going to ask you about this new publication and how you see this, because this is also a tool. How do we bridge the gap between a publication like this and that classroom practice?
Yeah. Look, we are doing these studies, and our studies are giving results on a system level. So the assessed classroom doesn't get really anything back. So a couple of years ago, we said, okay, we think we need to give back to teachers because they also let us into their classrooms and have the assessment for the students and giving the questionnaires, and they fill them out. So we said we need to give something back. And so we started to launch a series. Now that's really for teachers. And we try to give them some ideas of what could be done. There's clearly not a one-fits-all solution. We know that. We can't tell a teacher, do this, and done. We are completely aware of that. But also with that book, we try to give some inspiration of how democratic values, civic and citizenship could be lived in a classroom. With also, and that's also what we have in other books of that series. We give some examples from different countries that can be used as inspiration. So that's what we can do. I mean, there's no this is the right way to do something, but there's multiple things. We are aware that teaching doesn't happen in space, but it's embedded in a culture. It's embedded in history. So you can't just have one thing and that works in every country. But with that book, we give some principles and then some examples that might hopefully inspire some teachers. And with that, we try to help a little bit the teachers in this not easy task in preparing the next generation. So that was the endeavor, and therefore I think I personally like this book very much because it's really getting there. It's not telling teachers this is what you have to do because there is not a single thing, but offering some perspectives that hopefully inspire some of the things.
That's great. And I mean, inspiration, but probably also some assurance.
Yeah.
Teaching in often a difficult context. And I'm wondering, we're going to hand over to the authors of the report shortly. But David, a last question for you. Tools, inspiration. We know that the profession is under quite some pressure at the moment. We know that there's a dramatic shortage of teachers, with growing numbers of teachers choosing to leave the profession because of conditions being hard. What's the link between teachers having rights and then promoting students' rights and democratic environments in their classrooms?
Well, without doing a 1 hour speech on that, Antonia, I was thinking about the book, and I was thinking about colleagues right now who are very much looking for signals, whether those are from policymakers, whether those come from that education is more than just about hitting a cut score, and that our students are more than a cut score, right? And I think whenever you can advance an idea that meets the profession where it is, and the real reason our research in terms of an OEC and IEA others show that one of the reasons people are leaving the profession as part of the burnout is they are not seeing in the schools the things that they care about and that brought them into teaching. They don't see the space to teach the values, to reinforce those, and they don't have the tools, they don't have the materials, they don't have the models, the examples that they can. So I think that's really important in terms of keeping people in, bringing people in as well into the profession that's intellectually interesting and important to democracy. I think all of those things, but it all comes back to a compelling idea. And I think what this book offers us is the chance to put a really important central idea back on the table for our members to be able to wrestle with, to think about, to share, to unpack, and to use in ways that are useful to them, to have a conversation about, to have a deliberation, have a debate about. And I think there is never anything as powerful as a good idea. And I think right now in this world, a good idea is to ensure that education, classrooms have a space for democracy to be taught, lived, and learned.
Perfect way of introducing the next segment, looking at the ideas that are captured in this new publication, Experiencing Democracy in the Classroom. We are going to invite two of the authors of this report to join us. Valeria Damiani from LUMSA University in Rome is joined by Gabriela Agrusti, also from the LUMSA University, and it's my pleasure to hand over to the two of you.
Okay, so good afternoon, good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with you and to present our book that is just released today. So many interesting aspects has been discussed by David and Dirk. So I will share my presentation and try to reconnect with what has already been said, because the book is strongly linked to this idea of providing students the space for experiencing democracy firsthand in the classroom and through the learning experience. So what is the core of the book? The core of the book are democratic learning environments, and the assumption of the book, the main assumption of the book, is the idea that schools and classrooms can be intended as a small society where students can experience democracy daily and firsthand. As we all know, the schools and classrooms are first places, the first context where students experience, living in a community that is diverse from the family. So they spend a lot of time at school, and whether schools are conceived as democratic learning environments, this can of course boost their civic learning in terms not only of knowledge or development of attitudes and skills, but also the development of values and the possibility for them to be engaged in meaningful civic activities. What are democratic learning environments? Not moving, sorry. Democratic learning environments at school and in the classroom are those environments that are shaped by democratic principles. That means human rights, democracy, and the rule of law. We know that citizenship education is strongly anchored to values and principles, and working on context allows teachers to provide those spaces where these values and principles can be put into action. So spaces for students to be engaged. The book follows the whole school approach developed by the Council of Europe, which includes three main dimensions for democratic learning environments. So the classroom dimension, so teaching and learning, so teachers can promote democratic learning environments within their teaching. School dimension, so a broader view at the school level in relation to democratic learning environments in terms of shared leadership styles and democratic governance, and the way shared decision making and student participation can be fostered. And then the links with the external community. So I would like now to focus on too much. Doesn't go back. Okay. On some of the key features of democratic learning environments at the school level. In relation to four main points that are analyzed and presented in the book in the way to support teachers in developing democratic learning environments in their own classrooms. So in the book, we provide methodological and practical support in relation to open classroom climate, so how to foster positive classroom climate that can in turn provide a safe space for discussion and deliberation processes. The way teachers can engage their students in active and experiential learning, starting from real and contemporary civic issues and providing spaces for reflection on the assumptions and the perceptions underlying these issues, and also offering opportunities for taking actions. And then also we explore different ways teacher can develop democratic processes in the classroom through the rethinking of classroom management and organization, for example, introducing class council or class meetings, co-decision procedures with the students in relation to the classroom rules. Teachers can booster students' responsibility towards their learning through the use of formative assessment, for example, through the sharing of learning objectives and assessment criteria. For instance, we know we want our students to be responsible citizens now and in the future, but their main responsibility is, of course, in learning. So we want also them to be equipped to be responsible learners. And then they use the adoption of cooperative learning. That is a very key strategy that can help teachers involve students in small groups to accomplish a task through inquiry and discussion. With ICCS, as Dirk already said, ICCS has helped us in understanding how important democratic learning environments are. If you're looking for some data, of course, cross-nationally, you can look at the international report, but also in the book, we are providing you with some prompts and examples on how to reflect on your own teaching in relation to the questions and in examples that are included in ICCS, especially in relation to open classroom climate for discussion, which is, of course, one of the recurrent findings. It's higher strong association with higher levels of civic knowledge. But also in ICCS and in the book, we present you some tips and examples that were reported by teachers participating in ICCS on active and experiential learning activities related to civic learning. For example, the students working on projects outside the school with different organizations, the debate, the use of role plays, and then also in other examples, as I said, openness in classroom discussions. And in ICCS, students have a positive perception of their classroom, of their openness of their classroom climate, so that because their teachers encourage them to make up their minds, and they are allowed to express their opinion in class, even if they are different from most of the other students. And then they have teachers who present several sides of issues when explaining them in class. Another example that is taken from ICCS is the school community cooperation. So all the activities that teachers can do in collaboration with organizations that are external to the schools, for example, NGOs on local municipality, and these activities may be related to environmental sustainability, the protection of human rights, or activity to raise people awareness on different contemporary civic issues, or activities for protecting the cultural and historical heritage. And yes, and the very last one, again, ICCS also provides examples on the way teachers can foster democratic processes in the classroom. For example, allowing students to taking part in decisions related to the teaching content, establishing and sharing assessment criteria, choosing the teaching material, and, as I said, taking part in establishing classroom classroom rules. So with this book, we connect international large-scale assessment with teachers' everyday practices, supporting teachers to navigate the complexity of civic and citizenship education delivery at school that we all know is a complex and demanding task that need support and sharing among the teachers community. Now I will pass on my colleague, Gabriella Grusti.
Thank you, Valeria, and thanks to the organizers and to host us. It's a privilege to be here. My name is Gabriella Grusti, and I'm going to dig into a little bit with details. You know, devils is in details. So we're going to try to have a glimpse on how this important and relevant theoretical framework can actually be translated into classroom practice. And first of all, let me tell you that, as Dirk was saying at the very beginning, we are not offering easy recipes in these books, so to-do lists or models to be followed step by step. But we are just trying to propose different viewpoints on experiences that actually teachers already do in their daily classes. And so the very first step we tried to consider is what is called in research and in literature study the so-called spiral of silence. When a teacher has to deal with a political or societal issue in the classroom, it is very easy to incur it in, a bottleneck of explaining situations and viewpoints that can be a minority viewpoints, for example. On the other hand, the teacher herself or himself can, be a little bit afraid. Depending on the cultural context, we heard about very difficult situations spread, unfortunately, all over the world, can be a little bit reluctant into entering this kind of issues with students. It's easier to stick to the curriculum, to stick to the cutoff score that it was mentioning before, and live with it. So how can we reverse this spiral of silence? How can we in classroom create practically an open classroom climate? First of all, we have to consider multicultural environment as a treasure, as a resource, and this is what ICCS data already telling us. Even if we know from ICCS last cycle data, migrant students with migrant background, diverse background, have low levels in civic knowledge results, still teachers deem their presence very relevant for their classrooms and their activities. I don't know how to go ahead in the slide. I don't think this is the first one, but yes, I don't know whether I can come back to this. You have a preview on the slides backwards still. So it is very, very important to try to, contrasting this spiral of silence by treasuring multicultural environment and creating a safe space. So even before probably an open classroom climate, teachers should concentrate on, and you see it in the slides now, improving their conflict resolution skills, improving all the actions that can lead to a real and effective team building among peers, so among students, and also within the interactions between students and teachers. And as I was saying before, the important part is trying to validating the right of having different viewpoints. So what are the pillars that we can uncover a little bit for enhancing this learning together? And teachers, I'm sure, all over the world know these pillars very well because they use them. So it's just connecting the dots here, is not proposing something entirely new. Mixing students, so diversity in grouping, students with different needs, with different levels, with different backgrounds. This can really be a step forward improvement. And then what is the role of the teacher? I can see effective teachers in democratic learning more as mediators, as facilitators. So really they should implement very easy strategies. I know they are well spread across teachers. For example, the think, pair, share strategy that you will find described in the book, or the GSO strategy that give values to specific skills of each and every student and mix them up again. So the interaction is not something totally natural. It should be scaffolded. It should be guided. And then, of course, I was very happy that this was brought up in the very beginning of this session, the elephant in the room, which is assessment. Assessment should be always meaningful. And what is meaningful assessment? Of course, meaningful assessment is the one that allows us to improve as learners. So to create an open classroom climate in which I feel safe, even if I'm wrong, because in order to learn, I need to be wrong many times until I reach a certain level of confidence. And so I need mutual respect from all the others involved in the community of learners, of course, and above all from the teacher. So a very effective strategies can help, guiding students into improving in their learning. And also dialogues, as can you see here, can be moderated and scaffolded by teachers. Yes, we know that civic and citizenship topic can easily lead to polarization. So I'm against you because I think differently from you. So here you have just mentioned, but I'm sure you know them, some strategies that teachers all over the world put in place. So for example, I can ask my students to tell me what is her or his opinion, and then ask them to defend the very opposite opinion. So think what they. Then we have role play. Then we have teachers as examples in modeling calm. Just one very final word, if I manage, on formative assessment, which is, I think, the backbone of managing styles of classroom, of coordinating teaching strategies. Here you have simplified and depicted the differences between traditional grading, which sometimes focused exclusively on error, and instead a positive error handling. So really from the teacher being aware that error can be a treasure, error can be opportunity for metacognitive reflection, self-regulation of what we hope in the future will be self-directed learner, is, as Valeria was saying, a backbone for creating a democratic environment. I don't know whether my time is up. I think so. So I will stop here. And thanks again for this opportunity.
Wonderful. Thank you, Valeria, and thank you, Gabriella. That's great. And I'm sure I'm not the only one who is looking forward to reading the full report. So what we're going to do now is that we're going to turn to 3 of EI's vice presidents to get reflections from the teaching profession from 3 different parts of the world. And for those of you who listened to the presentation and had questions, I'd ask you to put those in the chat, because we are going to come back to both Gabriella and Valeria and Dirk and David at the end of this session to look at some of those questions. But for now, it's my great pleasure to invite 3 colleagues. I'm going to start with you, Mariem, if I may. Mariem is our vice president for the African region. She is from Senegal, and it's my pleasure to hand you the floor.
Merci beaucoup, Antonia, pour m'avoir donné la parole. Je voudrais saluer toutes et tous et dire que, comme vous l'avez dit déjà dans votre introduction, nous sommes dans un contexte où la démocratie est mise à rude épreuve en Afrique, mais comme d'ailleurs un peu partout dans le monde, mise à l'épreuve sous différentes formes, les régimes autoritaires, les restrictions de liberté, les attaques contre les droits, notamment le droit à l'éducation. Et c'est pourquoi il me plaît de saluer la sortie de ce livre, Vivre la démocratie en classe, et la tenue du webinaire d'aujourd'hui pour son lancement. Je crois effectivement que dans cette situation plus que préoccupante, il est effectivement important de réfléchir sur comment, depuis la salle de classe, il faut essayer de renverser la tendance et semer les germes de la démocratie chez les apprenants et instaurer la culture démocratique dans les sociétés. Il faut impérativement promouvoir la démocratie et l'éducation, et les enseignants sont un facteur clé de par leur rôle de transformation et de socialisation des hommes pour une société juste et équitable. L'éducation par les contenus, je pense qu'on a beaucoup parlé de contenu, ici en Afrique ou au Sénégal en particulier, quelquefois, on est obligé de tronquer certains contenus faute de, on en reviendra sur les défis, faute d'enseignants et faute d'infrastructures fonctionnelles. Je pense qu'on pourra revenir sur ça par rapport aux défis. Donc, l'éducation est importante par ce que je disais, les contenus, parce que, en plus de développer, en plus de développer les connaissances, les compétences, l'éducation favorise également l'inculpation, la compréhension des valeurs démocratiques et des postures citoyennes. Cependant, pour que ce rôle puisse être accompli par l'éducation et les enseignants, il faut relever un certain nombre de défis. Et parmi ces défis, il faut d'abord la démocratisation de l'éducation. Des millions d'enfants sont en dehors de l'éducation. Quand ceux qui ont la chance d'être formés sur les valeurs démocratiques, à côté d'eux, il y a un bon nombre qui n'ont pas de formation, le problème d'injustice et d'inéquité impacte la mise en œuvre des valeurs démocratiques de façon globale. Donc, il faut une démocratisation de l'éducation, que ça soit accessible par toutes et tous, à toutes et tous, qu'ils soient riches, pauvres, en zone urbaine ou en zone rurale. Cela permet d'éradiquer les disparités et permettre une meilleure compréhension par tous et appropriation aussi des valeurs démocratiques. La pénurie des enseignants, je pense qu'on en a parlé également. Il faut recruter et former des enseignants en nombre suffisant pour combler le déficit criard qui affecte négativement la qualité de l'éducation. Les infrastructures ne sont pas fonctionnelles pour régler le problème crucial des effectifs pléthoriques. Je pense que le pléthore empêche la démocratie dans la salle de classe. Parce que il faudrait, pour la démocratie en salle, il faut mettre en œuvre des méthodes participatives. Je pense que dans le livre, c'est ressorti. Les méthodes participatives, la réorganisation, l'organisation dans la salle de classe. C'est des facteurs qui forgent la confiance. Ça forge la confiance, l'acceptation des différences, la tolérance, la culture de la paix. C'est la mise en pratique des groupes permet la participation et la mise en confiance des élèves qui sont mis en groupe. Mais également, nous avons un autre défi, le défi des curricula, que ce soit pour la formation des enseignants que pour la formation des élèves. Ils doivent inclure des contenus sur les valeurs démocratiques et la citoyenneté. Parce que quand les enseignants ne sont pas formés, il sera difficile de leur demander de donner ce qu'ils n'ont pas reçu. Donc la formation est importante à ce niveau et la révision aussi des curricula. Assurer dans cette formation des formations qui libèrent le leadership des enseignants, leur expertise et leur autonomie, pour qu'ils puissent organiser leur classe et voir les meilleures méthodes de mener la participation des élèves. Les enseignants peuvent vouloir transmettre les valeurs démocratiques, mais sans ces préalables dont nous venons de parler, comment tenir compte de la particularité, des spécificités de chaque élève? Quand les classes inadaptées accueillent 60 à 80, voire 100 élèves, comment prendre en charge chaque élève dans ces conditions? Face à ces situations, l'enseignant est obligé de faire un cours magistral. Il ne connaît pas particulièrement les élèves pour pouvoir partager avec eux des valeurs démocratiques. Pour dire donc que dans ces salles inadaptées, il faut essayer de trouver une solution pour que la participation puisse être effective. Parce que nous l'avons dit, quand on organise les groupes, les jeux de rôle sont faciles à mener avec les élèves pour la prise de responsabilité. Pour dire donc que les enseignants sont disposés et prêts pour éduquer à la démocratie, mais encore faudrait-il que les gouvernements investissent dans l'éducation et les enseignants pour améliorer les conditions et l'environnement des enseignements-apprentissages. Voilà ce que ça m'inspire, donc la démocratie en salle de classe. Effectivement, ça repose essentiellement sur la participation et il faut régler certains défis pour pouvoir le faire. Merci beaucoup.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Mariam. And thank you also for reminding us of the hundreds of millions of children that remain out of school and whom we still need to be able to reach. From Senegal, we're going to move to Brazil and to our Vice President from the Latin American region. Heleno, it's my pleasure to hand over to you.
Obrigado, Antônia. Quero cumprimentar todas as pessoas, né, que nos acompanham. Um abraço aqui especial ao David, ao Dirk, a Mariene, a Meike e a Valéria e a Gabriela, né, que já falaram aqui conosco. De fato, pelo já foi dito neste webinário, nós passamos pelo momento de fragilidade e erosão institucional da democracia aqui na América Latina. Há uma queda na confiança pública, há um avanço, né, do crime organizado, e o tempo todo estamos sob ameaça, né, ao Estado de Direito. E com isso se mantém, se aprofunda até as desigualdades sociais, econômicas e educacionais. E claro que esse cenário, desse momento, traz repercussão para dentro da educação. E entre nós, trabalhadores da educação, os estudantes e das nossas escolas, encontramos um processo de precarização, né, dos direitos, que já relatamos aqui, uma insegurança dentro do ambiente escolar e uma intensificação do trabalho, marcada pela avaliação padronizada e o que nós chamamos aqui de um pânico moral. Muitas pessoas evangélicas e militantes da extrema-direita pressionando todos os temas, conteúdos sobre a questão de gênero, questão de raça, da acessibilidade, da educação inclusiva e até defendendo o tempo todo a educação domiciliar para abandonar a escola, isolar a escola. Então, para enfrentar esse cenário aqui na América Latina, nós criamos um movimento pedagógico latino-americano, tentando aprofundar esses temas e trazer ideias e forças aos trabalhadores em educação para enfrentar esses temas dentro das escolas, em seus locais de trabalho. Com a grande contribuição da Internacional da Educação, nós conseguimos aqui também trazer uma experiência para o Brasil e no Uruguai, né, do círculo de aprendizagem conduzido pelas professoras, pelos professores, para avaliação formativa. Então, esse foi uma experiência, uma ação que eu considero muito importante para se contrapor a esta avaliação padronizada, a essas políticas que vêm de cima para baixo, impondo às nossas escolas e aos nossos professores, e enfrentar também essa questão temática. Conseguimos aqui em parceria, né, Nacional da Educação, a CNTE, aqui no Brasil, e o grupo, né, de estudos sobre política educacional e trabalho docente, o Gestrado da Universidade Federal de Minas Gerais, organizar essa ação aqui com o objetivo de colocar a prática cidadã para desenvolver a democracia dentro da sala de aula, para que o espaço da sala de aula seja um espaço permanente de diálogos, de construções coletivas dos conteúdos e dos projetos dentro da escola, levando em consideração os fatores socioeconômicos, culturais e ambientais da comunidade escolar. Fazer com que haja o protagonismo dos nossos estudantes, para que, de fato, atuem como sujeito dos processos. E para isso é importante a prática dentro da sala de aula da eleição para representante de turmas. Eu acho que tem a ver com a organização desses nossos estudantes, criar fóruns de representantes de turmas dentro da escola, estimular a criação de grêmio estudantil como forma de organização. Trabalhar coletivamente a minuta do projeto político-pedagógico da escola como espaço de formação desses nossos estudantes. Além, claro, de garantir o assento dos representantes de turmas no conselho de classe, que muitas vezes o conselho de classe só está os professores avaliando os estudantes. Em que momentos os estudantes vão estar nos avaliando para que esse diálogo permanente possa trazer essa pessoa para ser o sujeito dessa construção coletiva? Temos um conselho escolar deliberativo, que de fato dirija a escola, e não apenas o diretor, que é executivo. É outra forma importante. Além, claro, de utilizar o instrumento da autoavaliação para consolidar esse diálogo permanente e fortalecer as características de uma avaliação formativa como forma de enfrentarmos esse processo, de fazer a prática cidadã dentro da sala de aula e dentro da escola, e quem sabe no futuro mudar o cenário que temos hoje, né, para melhor. Obrigado, Antônia.
Thank you. And thank you for taking us all the way from democracy alongside rule of law, the realization of rights, down to the very, very practical with the whole class electing a representative and students learning to collectively work for the better. Thank you. And with that, we will move from Brazil to Germany and to our Vice President for the European region. Maike, you have the floor.
So thank you, Antonia, for giving me the floor. And thank you, and dear colleagues, thank you very much for the presentation. The book makes a very comprehensive contribution with concrete practical examples on how to strengthen democracy in the classroom and in schools. As the German Education Union, GIW, we fully agree it is essential to empower students to actively shape their lives and to foster agency, responsibility, and critical thinking. Schools and education institutions play a crucial role in this regard. From our experience in Germany, I would like to highlight 3 points on this topic. First, promote democratic school development and live democratic process in schools. Education institutions should have a space, autonomy, and resources to create democratic structures so that students experience active and meaningful participation. For instance, through schools, conferences, student councils, and active involvement in classroom decisions. It shows that student voices are heard and that they can make a difference. It underlines the importance of democratic processes. Schools need multi-professional cooperation in order to develop as democratic learning environments that uphold the human rights principles of participation, protection against discrimination, and inclusion. Second, we have positive experiences of working with civil society organizations and NGOs in schools. For example, through initiatives like Schools Without Racism, Schools with Courage. External partners bring valuable expertise, practical approaches, and perspective that complement the work of teachers and enrich democratic learning. Their contribution helps to address important social issues and makes democratic values more tangible for students. Therefore, these partnerships and networks should be systematically strengthened. And the third, in a situation where we experience increasing attacks by far-right actors aimed at intimidating teachers, defending and enhancing democracy has become even more urgent. As GRW, we are currently running a campaign saying teachers must not be neutral. They have a professional and ethical responsibility to take a stand for democratic principles and human rights, also in the classroom. Because neutrality here is not impartiality, it becomes passive acceptance, even or complicity in the face of anti-democratic positions. The campaign aims to raise awareness, strengthen teachers' agency, and provide concrete support when they come under pressure. In this context, we have started a petition within a broader alliance, including organizations like Greenpeace and the Federal Student Conference, calling on responsible ministers and authorities to implement structural and institutional change to better support teachers and democratic education. The petition has already received significant public backing and support. Over 250,000 people have signed them. Its core message is clear. Schools cannot be neutral when confronted with anti-democratic and misanthropic positions. They have a duty to actively counter hatred and exclusion and to equip students to do the same. Democracy must be lived and protected in schools. It requires standing a stance. The petition includes 7 concrete demands, which I will share in the translated version in the chat. A central point is the strengthening of political and civic education, both as an own subject and as a cross-curricular responsibility across all subjects. It has to be a guiding principle in schools. Dear colleagues, we need to continue working on these topics, and the book makes an important contribution. It provides strong arguments and good examples for how democratic learning environments can be developed and sustained. It also supports a process of learning from each other's experiences internationally. At a time when democratic values are under pressure, we need this combination of clear positioning and practical guidance to turn commitment into every practice in our school. Thank you.
Thank you, Maike. That's wonderful. And I'm thrilled to hear that 250,000 already have signed the petition. That's promising. And I think there are many here that look forward to working with you on this. So thank you, Maike. Thank you, Helena. Thank you, Mariem. I think this was a super powerful set of reflections, not just on the role of teachers, some of the practices that we do have, but also the challenges that we face in these different contexts. And it's a stark reminder that there is a lot of work still to do. We are going to open up for a couple of questions and answers here in the last segment of this webinar. We have received a number of different questions. I'm going to start with you, Valeria, if I may. There is a question about practical insights. So a colleague who's particularly interested in understanding how schools and teachers can create inclusive, participatory and respectful learning environments that encourage students to think critically, express their opinions confidently, and appreciate differences. A big question. Some reflections from you would be great.
Yeah, thank you. So big question and a quick answer. So I hope to to answer in a way that addresses all these different issues. So again, there are several aspects that the teacher needs to consider when he or he wants to work and promote a democratic learning environment. The first one, as we said before, is the open classroom climate. That is, it is made up of different key elements. Safety, so the quality of relationships between students and between the teachers and the students, for example, but also engagement of the students across their learning path. The academic climate, so the way teaching is processed and the teaching expectations, the learning expectation, the learning materials. Again, the classroom size and organization, so the way the classroom resources are offered and opportunities for meaningful participation are provided to students. So the first step is should be working on positive and open classroom climate. And then, as we said, providing opportunities for democratic processes in the classroom through meaningful participation to students, not only in teaching activities, as we said, but also through assessment and the opening up of the school to the community in terms of school networks and projects with the local community. So there are different strengths, different features that teachers can look at in order to foster the democratic and an inclusive environment.
That's great, and that last piece really goes back to Maike's example as well of working with civil society and the local community. Great, thank you, Valeria, and I'm going to actually cheekily give Dirk and David the same question. We've had a question around autonomy, teachers' autonomy, and how we support this in our efforts to promote democracy in the classroom.
I mean,
Go
yeah.
for it, yeah.
Okay. I think it's very important because we know that the student and the situation in different classrooms is very different, and the students need to be allowed to adapt to what's needed in a particular classroom. I also would like to react a little bit on these really insights that we also got from the different regions.
Please.
And yes, when we hear that in Africa there's quite a number of students out of school, that's definitely something that's concerning, and that hinders also teaching, not only teaching of civic and citizenship education, but in general. And that's something that's striking. And what we heard also from Brazil, that reminded me that we do have an issue, and an increasing issue actually, of students' absenteeism. What we heard there, but it's something that we see in our studies as a general phenomenon across the world. That after the pandemic, students' absenteeism is increasing, and that's a big issue and a problem all around the world. And if we think about teaching civic and citizen education, I mean, as we said, it's not only knowledge, but also the interactions. And this requires students to be present. So if you don't have your students in the classroom, how can they experience democracy? And that's a big problem. And I think that it's also something that we need to tackle and have further research on why we see this increased amount of absenteeism. And I think also here teachers play a significant role also to look at that, because if your students are not in your classroom, then they won't experience or get the experience of you showing them actually democratic values and how to interact with each other. And I think that's an important aspect to see.
Yeah. But what would you say, David? How are we doing on the professional autonomy front?
I think it's concerning, quite frankly. I mean, so as far as Education International, I was thinking little bit about higher education as well as the K-12 sector. And Dirk and I have been talking about this a little bit before in terms of the attacks. So professional autonomy and academic freedom, to me, go hand in hand. And that is where truth is defended. That is where free speech, freedom of speech, expression, all those things are put into practice. And I think when we see in countries where there's legislation that protects professional autonomy, protects academic freedom, where it's in collective agreements and that is enforceable, and you have seen it being followed up, we do okay. What I worry more about is in terms of the places where, in the name of efficiency and quality, we are seeing more scripted, sort of high stakes, deprofessionalizing approaches to reforms that are coming forward, where it's not so much about your professional discretion. It's not so much you're feeding it through your experience, your collective wisdom, your knowledge, using your skills. It's very much where it's a compliance model where you have to basically read off of a script, and particularly with AI, and that's the other piece of it in terms of those teachers that more are turning to using AI to write their lessons or to do evaluation things. I mean, the cognitive offloading, the cognitive stunting isn't just something that students are dealing with, but the jurisdictions and the places where you see more time for collaboration, you see more time for teachers to do their own research, for that research to be then shared with their students, with university partnerships. The book talks about that as well, the importance in terms of engaging with communities. That's where I see sort of like more of an inoculation against the sort of anti-democratic forces that were trying to stamp out that professional, calling it bias, calling it whatever. But what I think Micah rightly points out too is it can't be neutrality. So I think we need more and better partnerships on this front. I know that the 1966 and 97 recommendations, ILO and ILO UNESCO recommendations, have very strong currently passages around professional autonomy that could be strengthened on academic freedom. I think that needs to be, so that we need to have international instruments that are actually supporting this, that enable teachers to then take the things that they're learning in the book, to have the time with each other and actually teach them in classrooms. So we have to make sure that the structures and the protections around them so that they can do that. I think it's certainly unfinished business. It's a lot of work still to be done, but we have I think what I would call sort of lighthouse examples that we can learn from and connect up into to more and better ways forward.
Great. So the next question we've got is for Gabriella, and this is a question about student voice, student participation, and how we can build practices that are more than just one-off, something that's sustained over time and done more consistently.
Again, I think that there is no single answer to this, and there are plenty of teachers out there know perfectly how to deal with it. What's the main suggestion we can give them for those that still need it is, again, to scaffold interaction, to create some habits in classroom dialogues and interaction, and to allow students, as Valeria was saying before, into decision-making processes, different levels within the school, the classroom and the school community, so that really this voice can be heard on one hand, and at the same time the students themselves have a direct experience on consequences of their decisions, processes, for example, implications, and different viewpoints on the same problem. So more than activities of problem solving, I would say that it would be wise to concentrate on problem posing, on structuring this kind of interaction, and based, of course, on mutual respect between students and teachers and all the non-teaching stuff, for example, that is involved daily in school life. So I think this could be a way.
That's great, and this is a reflection that would be nice to continue and discuss with everyone online how you do that in practice and how you carve out the time, how you dare to prioritize that sometimes when there's a lot of other things to get through as well. We then have a question that is very specifically for David about trade union strategies. How do trade unions build capacity among their members on promoting democracy in the classroom? What's the role of unions here?
Well, I was just thinking, harking back to our 25th anniversary.
Yeah.
And at the 25th anniversary of EI, my predecessor, Fred Van Leeuwen, and Susan Hopgood, actually with Jelmer Evers and others, compiled a book called The 25 Lessons on Education and Democracy, lessons from trade unions around the world. And we looked around the world at the examples over time in history, how we're doing that within our unions, within our own union structures, which, as I said, still requires more work, but in terms of bargaining for democratic spaces, involvement of students, involvement of women, marginalized groups, in terms of their participation, for curriculum that is relevant and reflective, for teachers to have the time, those types of things. So I think one of the things that we saw from that experience, 5 or 6 years on from that, is this notion that we need to be able to broaden the scope of bargaining to include defense of democracy in what we do. It can't not just be about sort of like workplace. It's not just about workload, but that's related to democracy. It's not just about salaries, but that's related to democracy. But it's also about the professional space. It's also about teachers being able to participate in their unions and seeing all of that as linked up. We have a education democracy with an action plan that we're working on. Inside of there, we have a very strong strand around academic freedom. And I think we need to see that as union business. I think we need to see professional autonomy as union business. I think we need to understand that these aren't just nice to haves, these are need to haves, that our actual movement is a democracy movement. I really think using the word we collectively, the narrative that we're up against, and we are up against it, is a narrative that talks about other people's children. I always call it the OPC, and this notion that it's all about competition, survival of the fittest, and multilateralism's dead. There are no such thing as human rights, and it's all get what you can and hold it, build a big high wall and hide with your people from climate or whatever it is, those bad guys that are all. Human history teaches us very clearly that we have achieved everything through cooperation, through democracy, through working together, through respecting each other, through fighting for each other. And I think as trade unions, the trade union movement, all global unions, and certainly education unions need to continue to make sure that democracy is very high on our agenda.
That's great. And with that, it is unfortunately time to wrap up this webinar. I will start by thanking all of the speakers. A warm thank you for being with us, for sharing your thoughts and your reflections. An extra thank you to the authors of the report. And I would wish all the participants at the webinar today happy reading as you dig into the report. I'd also wish you happy discussions, because I think that's what a report like this deserves. It deserves not just readers, but a lot of conversations. Ask each other those questions. reach out to hear what not just your colleagues, but people in other organizations think about these and how we can work better together to defend our commitment to democracy in our classrooms, in our school communities, but also beyond, knowing that that is where it all starts, and that is the only way of making sure that we defend societies where everyone can live together in dignity. Let me also thank the interpreters for being with us and allowing us to engage with one another. This is one step in a longer process. It wasn't the first step, but there will be many more steps on this in this collaboration for democracy in the classroom. Many thanks to IEA, to you, Dirk, and to all your colleagues who've made this happen. To you, David, and all our colleagues here at EI for making this happen. Take good care and see you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you. Right.